of you, Aspasia. So to the degree that we're looking for how to draw this all together, I just would just say, hey, that was pretty cool when you came up with those two words and then you wanted to explore them. That set a
That's
lot of stuff in motion.
that's the perfect introduction. Hey, it was really cool when you came up with those two words. Bam.
Yeah. No, I mean, those words, I would, they're just, that all came together from being in spaces like this. You know, there's just no way that there's no way I would have taken a phrase like that in my mind and have put any importance to it whatsoever, or in the way that all of this has just naturally evolved if it weren't for all of this, and you guys and these spaces online. So it's all, you know, it's all of us. I know we talked about speaking the three of us about this idea of authentic resonance quite a long time ago. And the two of you had a really wonderful conversation about it. I've been thinking a little around, well, lately I've been talking a lot, I'm always talking about anger, but I guess in this online context, I've been talking a bit more about anger with people. And so I have been thinking, because as I talk about that, there's a lot of crossover. Like, so I've been thinking a little bit about how those two things relate to one another. But I mean, I'm always really inspired by both of you. So whatever feels front of mind, please feel free to share.
Well, not to jump in, but that's very kind of you. But I do think anger is actually a fantastic case study for the question of authentic resonance, because it is this intensity of experience that forces a choice upon you that is not self-evident in the choice you should make, right? And I think also, I really loved what you were saying about the anxiety of anger and this double move of push down, push up. And you find yourself in a choice of, should you let it out or should you suppress it? I was actually speaking with Michael last night, inspired by your talk with him. And we were talking about like anger hyphen hate versus anger hyphen care, and how there seems to be a difference there. And how I was also wondering if what ends up happening is where you lack care, because care is like learning how to master anger, like some sort of mastery of it. If you don't know how to master it, then you do just repress it, right? Because like the absence of mastery tends to be repression, right? And there's something about, I do think of all the emotional experiences, because I am interested in anger having this, a way I've described it, like with Sam and them, is like this daydream quality. Like you just find yourself angry sometimes. It's not necessarily like you can't, it's just very sudden. And that intensity of an experience that then says to you a choice, or affords the opportunity of a choice, seems to be, I do wonder, honestly, if these kind of emotional experiences might be the ultimate training ground for the possibility of authentic resonance.
Yeah.
And that actually, you know, I've been talking about like the phenomenology of emotions. And what phenomenology means is obviously experience, but another key idea of phenomenology is the conditions of possibility. So for example, if I experience the color blue, there's the experience of blue, and then there's the question, what must reality be like in its conditions so that I can experience blue, right? So likewise with emotions, what are the conditions of possibility necessary in the human subject and reality itself so that anger exists like it does, as this very interesting mixture of not inherently being bad, posing a question of what you can do with it, asking you like, okay, well, I need to learn to acknowledge it. All of these kind of like, the very fact it throws at you almost a Gordian knot of potential responses to it, then in of itself suggests that reality, to live with the very conditions of reality, requires something like authentic resonance, because you have to make a choice that is not obvious you made the right choice, but you have to provide yourself the confidence that you made the right choice, even if you don't emotionally necessarily give it to yourself. You train yourself into the place where you get the authentic resonance, right? It's almost like, I'll stop here, but it's almost like maybe there's something about authentic resonance that is an emotion that comes relative to a choice regarding an emotion. Like how you choose to respond to anger then creates authentic resonance is an emotion in response to a choice to an emotion. I know that's a long-winded sentence, but I've been thinking about that. So I think anger and authentic resonance are very interesting to think together.
Yeah. Do you mind if I just say something really quickly, Seth? And
please.
It's your turn next. In my mind, you can't generally, you can't get to the authentic resonance. There is no authentic resonance until you do some work to clear out the blockages, right? And so, and we've talked about this before, and that kind of work is not, I mean, there's lots of different things that you could do. There's different types of blockages, but I think the most important one that gets in our way of just having some clearer access to what we want to do in a moment is emotional blockages. It is all this emotional repression and stuff. And so anger really sits at well, it sits at the forefront, I think. It's kind of, it depends on the person, but for many people, it can be the thing that's sort of at the front of the system that's it's the clearest that there's a blockage there. Like you're getting in touch with it and you're calling it anger to some degree, but it's really it's like kind of magma trying to come up out of the ground. And say by the time it kind of whittles its way through all these like blockages and things, and it becomes fused with other minerals along the way, and then it comes out with a force and a directionality that is different to what it might have done if it was clear. And also as a substance is now different, because it's like, I mean, I'm doing this out loud, I have no idea, but you understand, like it's so different. And yet we still call that anger, like it's the original thing. And so it's those blockages aren't just going to sit there and get in the way of emotions. They're there. They're like a filter. They're a lens that we start to sort of be in the world with. It's like it's these barriers that go up between us and outside of us and the other, us and then our sort of self-reflective capacity of ourselves, like how we then reflect on who we are. Because then our meaning making comes on, and we have these wonderful brains and they come up with all these fancy stories for why we must have acted that way when we were feeling that thing, and so much of that reinforces the idea that it was anger and it wasn't anxious and all these things, and that it was the full extent of the anger. And so I think for me, yeah, like the connection, there's a lot of connection points, but the connection point is that yes, your experience of anger is going to be transformed on working through those blockages. Your experience of anger will be transformed, and that same clarity with which you then come to be able to experience anger, notice it, work with it, like choose what you're going to do with it, hold it, reflect on it, do all those higher order things. That is enhanced by unblocking the sticky system. And to me, that is related to authentic resonance. Authentic resonance has something about it that's sort of almost like the ease with which I sort of know what direction I want to take. I sort of know what I'm going to do in this moment, even if I can't give you a nice written thesis about, here's my reasoning. There's just some ease with which I know, and I do think there is some lack of anxiety that is relevant to that too. But there's a few other things I just want to throw in, and then I'll pass it to you, Seth. I do think the somatic pathways, I'm glad you brought that bit up, Daniel. I think that's the bit that I don't get to talk about as much, that we do in my work, and Seth is obviously keen to hear you because you work with all this stuff. The anxiety displaces our ability to have the full extent of the anger inside us. It's just how it works. And so once we allow the anger to fully connect to it inside, that displaces the anxiety. It's a really interesting interplay. And then you were talking about anger, hate, and anger care. I really like that. There's something actually that Patricia wrote, Patricia Coghlan. She's an incredible IS2DP therapist and trainer, and she actually trained with Davenlo, who created the technique. She left a message on the conversation with Michael and I about the fact that anger is related to care, like anger is related to hope. And once hope is gone, there is no point to anger anymore. And so there is, I keep trying to make this link between anger and agency. Like there's anger, and I think this maybe goes to the daydream thing that you were saying, Daniel. There's like, anger has a real directionality to it, and a hoping for something to change something. Like it wants to enact, like to change something and do something. And you can already hear in that how vital that is in order for people to be able to create, to innovate, to want for more, to hope for more, to push the boundaries. You obviously have to be able to do that in a way that takes into account lots of other factors. But at its heart, I do see it as having that momentum to it. And there is something about that that obviously has a really strong parallel to authentic resonance, because it's the understanding of, yeah, I guess it's the understanding of the directionality of authentic resonance to some degree, and how those two things work together. But I just spewed out lots of stuff there because I'm so excited now that everything's spinning in my head. So Seth, I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah, this is fun. So I agree that anger is a really interesting pathway into talking about authentic resonance. So I'm happy with that sort of, I'll call it a case study, the case study of anger and authentic resonance. But what I'd like to bring in is maybe just to zoom out a bit more. So I think I have been thinking about this from a sort of a general or anyway, some sort of a zoomed out perspective, because I couldn't remember all the details of all the fascinating things that came up in all the conversations. But the phrase authentic resonance has stuck with me, and something that's come out in all the conversations is part of what we've talked about is, what does a moment of authentic resonance feel like? And we've sort of mapped that out in different ways. But then we've also said, you know, in order for that moment to occur, or in order for, let's say, us to have more moments of authentic resonance in the future, there's all kinds of work and preparation and training we might do. Now, if I have a difficulty with anger, perhaps I could go visit Aspasia and do however many sessions one does with you, right? And that would really, yeah, just one, probably take care of all my anger issues. That would be great. We'll set that up later. But you know, there's a thing I can do, you know, or there's, you know, we live at this point in a world of an infinite number of different modalities and practices and different, you know, forms of psychotherapy, and there's a range of things, and we all know that this one works well for this person, but the other one works well for a different person. If we come back to anger, we also know that the thing that makes me boiling mad happens to you, and you shrug and say, what's the big deal, right? So even though we can talk about anger as a phenomenon that many of us, all of us have experienced, and we can track what's similar about my experience of anger and your experience of anger, for me to know how to handle my anger, you know, if I worked with Aspasia, she would, as I understand it, help me identify what are the particular things that make me angry. So this is just to say, if one of my pathways to authentic resonance, let's say, is clearing out the channels that get filled with anger in my individual system, then I have to do that particular work, and there's no one who can do it for me. Someone like Aspasia might have a kind of a skill set where she can help me, you know, zoom in on that particular thing. So anyway, there's a lot we could talk about there. And of course, we could pick other things than anger, but I think anger is a very good one. But I also thought that going back to that moment of authentic resonance. So, and if we're talking about anger, like I think part of what we've already said as well, there's the time I got angry and I just lost it. And then there's the time I got angry and I channeled that anger into effective action. And that's probably what we would call authentic resonance. But both of those situations might unfold in a few instances, right? You said that thing to me and I lost it, and I said the thing that made you not want to be my friend again, and done, right? And then I can go back later and figure out what happened. Or, you know, you said that thing that made me really angry, and I kind of, you know, looked off into space or something like that for like 3 seconds, and I just saw exactly why it makes me angry, exactly what is wrong, and exactly how to right the wrong, and boom, and authentic resonance. But what I think is interesting is, in that moment, I either was prepared or I wasn't. But we can still look at that moment and just say, wow, something came up, and then it it came out. And then I think the value, because still, if I understand something like what is authentic resonance, I think that the main value, like maybe for someone who's listening, is that I can train myself to have more authentic resonance in the future.
Yeah.
I also wanted to say, it could be that I have these terrible anger problems. I'm always blowing my top, and everyone knows that I need to go visit Aspasia last week. But then some other thing happens, and because of my peculiar life experience, everyone doesn't know what to do, but I know exactly what to do. And even though all these other occasions I can't handle my anger, this one particular occasion, I just happen to, maybe by luck, have the skill set and have the perspective, and I saw what was going on in that corner of the room that no one else saw, whatever it is. And so anyone potentially, I think, could experience authentic resonance. And of course, any one of us could experience the opposite, right? But one of the things, and I'll leave it here, but just as a question for us, I think there's a value in having an experience and saying something afterwards like, wow, maybe that was authentic resonance. And what did that just feel like? Even if I know how I did it or I don't know how I did it, because if I could have that experience and say, that's the thing, then when I look forward into the future of this mad, chaotic world that we're now living in, I kind of, even if it's just imaginary, I have a place to put my North Star, right? To have a sense of, when I enter that difficult situation tomorrow where 25 different things could go wrong, what if I had a feeling kind of like yesterday afternoon when I handled that other thing really well? So that's what I wanted to put in at the beginning.
I love that. But because there is I mean, this happens all the time with me, because I'm not walking around with authentic resonance happening all the time. So like I'm grappling with something, and I can feel like, oh, I'm going to do I don't know, I'll make this decision, and then I feel all the anxiety, and like everyone knows this experience. You're in your head thinking about what you're going to do. It's so uncomfortable, and then I think I've settled on something, but it's really not settled, because then I find myself anxiously thinking, should I, right? But there's like a clearing in the clouds sometimes, and there's like a that's what I'm gonna, like, that's right, that's what I'm gonna do. Like there is a completely different quality to it. There's a, and I think that's probably what led me down this whole path to begin with, trying to describe, like you say, what that is, and helping people to tune into that more, so that, like you say, they have a repertoire to an experiential repertoire to pull on, to be able to compare it to, this decision I'm making now. Is it coming from that same place? And maybe you'll never be able to get to that same place for every decision. But it is nice to know what that feels like. And it's still really hard for me sometimes to understand why it's difficult to get back there sometimes for certain decisions. I do think, I know we're talking about this in relation to anger, but it's more and more so for me, it's the relationship to anxiety that seems most relevant. But I mean, that goes hand in hand with the kind of anger we're talking about anyway. It's a fused state. So yeah, I did have more I want to say on that, but Daniel, did you want to jump in, or?
Well, there's wonderful. So the term resonance, so there's a few things. Resonance is a term that can be associated with field, social field. It can be I harmonize with, I feel a resonance with, I feel a certain restoration. So there's also the question of what would be inauthentic resonance, which is kind of a notion which I think most people actually live in. And for me, the inauthentic resonance is where you try to return the social field through a certain denial, anxiety, or performance, right? So there's something that happens where authentic resonance is this moment. Well, I would also say, so on this question of the exact feeling of it, I think when you don't have authentic resonance, there's a very active inner voice, a very active internal space, and a very active withdrawal to an internal, right? Authentic resonance is that moment where the internal withdrawal suddenly, boom, goes back outward and resonates, goes back on the social field. It goes back into the world, right? And what's interesting too is when you get authentic resonance, you could have someone who disagrees with your choice, but you've actually come to the place where their disagreement no longer makes you withdraw. You're okay with it. But what's interesting is that seems antisocial, but actually in authentic resonance, the possibility of a real social is there, because if you did withdraw when you met that disagreement, you would be inauthentic in your socialization because you'd be performing, right? So it's an interesting thing where the moment of authentic resonance seems to have to be where that inner chaos stops, which is a individual activity that affords a outward space. And it's more like, again, I'm thinking that language of field. Jacob talks about field. There are many people, you return to being a kind of field, which is not an infinite expanse into the ocean or something. It's like a field, like people can enter your space and you're not disturbed, right? Like your field is maybe, I don't know, I'll just make up a number. It's 10 feet around you or something, right? It's like, that's your field. And it's not, your field is not anyone on planet Earth, but you as a subject are not merely a point. You're more like a range, right? And it's authentic resonance seems to be a moment where you feel the return of your carrying yourself as a range more than a point. Because when you withdraw to yourself, what do you become more like? You're becoming more like a point, right? And maybe like you're withdrawing, you're more like that inner voice. You're more of a point than you are a field, right? So authentic resonance is this expansive feeling, but not delusion. It's more you just go back to your normal field. Because when you walk through the day, you don't experience yourself as an eye, like a ragged point. You experience yourself as, 30 feet, like 10 feet around you. That's your experience of yourself, right? And it goes back to that, which is, of course, other, because the other can step into your quote unquote 10 feet, right? And authentic resonance is even if someone in your 10 feet, to just make an arbitrary number, your field disagrees with you, it doesn't make you pull in your field, right? And to me, just kind of experimenting with the idea of inauthentic resonance, I think that is probably where you try to restore your field while you're actually still a point. Like you still have an inner voice going on, but you're doing the performance and you're trying to look like you have authentic resonance. You're trying to act like the field is there. You're trying to act like you're open. You're trying to create resonance when it's not, because it's inauthentic, right? So I think like the difference between inauthentic resonance and authentic resonance has something to be about the return of that field. And I think anger is interesting because often in my experience, when you get mad about something, and I'll just, sometimes you're like, oh, I'm mad about that because I'm actually worried. Oh, it's anxiety. And then it vanishes. That's what's very interesting. There can be, when you name the anger, we talked about, like when you name it, there's this it's actually very quick. It's not like a gradual, it can actually very quickly vanish, right? And it's like, boom, the field's back, right? It's like, boom, the field's back. Just like that. It's like you're point, boom, there it goes. And that moment of the boom feels like the moment of authentic resonance, right? And it also has, because there's this very interesting question that's being brought up on will. Field also feels like flow. That's what's also interesting about field. It feels like movement. When you have your field, the field is not a stagnant thing. The field is like, it has a kind of dynamic movement to it, right? And the question is, why does a human being generate a kind of field when they're authentic? I do think it's because we are kind of more like, to Seth's work, we are as individuals more like bodies that move, right? The field is this reflection of this moving being. And I was speaking with Javier and Jacquin, and they were talking about Aquinas, and I think there's an interesting distinction in Aquinas. Aquinas says there's a difference between intention and will. Will is just what you are. Your body, the body thinks. Seth talked about, like, the body thinks, right? Your body actually is always willing. It's always kind of active. It's always willing. It wants to live. It wants to think. Your brain, this is the kind of point that I think Aquinas makes. Your brain doesn't so much will, it intends. And intention is at its best when it's intending to let the will flow, when it's releasing the body, when it's letting the emotions motion, right? Because there's emotion, right? So the point of thinking is not to be the will, but to kind of clear so that the will can come forth. And the directionality of your will is relative to the training of your body, right? To do that kind of training and let up these blockages. But the brain is the intending entity, that figures out how to intend to let the will go, right? But here's why I think anger is very interesting and could be tied to this, and I think it is tied to the authentic resonance. I think the moment of anger almost is defined where will hits something and intention doesn't know what to intend. So most of your life, most of the time, will and intention are like two rivers that merge and they're just kind of going. Because what you intend, your body also wills, and there's not really a break between them, right? You're just kind of going. But in a moment of anger, something you will, it hits your inability to know how to intend it. Like if you hurt someone in a relationship, right? You were doing what you thought was good, and it turned out they didn't take it as good. So your will encounters a limit of its telos. What it's trying to do is the care, right? And it finds itself still willing, and you don't know how to direct that will. You don't know what to intend. And so what happens? Frustration. Intention and will break. Intention doesn't know how to direct the will, and there's a frustration that occurs that then you can respond to that frustration with anxiety, try to press it, but you haven't actually addressed it. Or you can try to kind of look at it and figure out how to go about the redirecting of the intention. So there's something about anger seemingly when will and intention are no longer aligned, where the body kind of is in conflict with the brain, almost, we could say, or the kind of the deeper self, like the brain is having to, well, that's another thing that almost happens in anger, and then I'll stop, but although I've said that 5 times, the brain almost in anger finds out it doesn't just think. Like that's it. The brain almost is humbled in that moment, right? It's like, will is an intention. There's a will that's alive and active, and there's more actually moving in me than just thought. The brain, anger is a moment where the brain almost blows up on the body, per se. Like, you're not supposed to think, body. I'm the one thinking it, right? So will and intention come in conflict. But then, of course, if authentic resonance is something about choice, it's the bringing intention and will back into alignment. And then once that occurs, there's a certain field that's restored, right? But of course, intention, in order to do this in an authentic way, has to mature. And the problem is, most of the time, intention doesn't want to mature, so it goes in an inauthentic direction, and will and intention are still in conflict, but you now are actually intending something that's more fake or performative, which then, of course, works until it breaks, right? So something about intention, will, coming in conflict, anger, authentic choice, restoring the field because you rebalance the relationship. But I'll stop there.
Yeah. But will also, in that was outstanding. I loved that so much there. But so intention has to mature, but the other part of the equation matters too, right? Like the will, and again, this goes back to this point I make, that people almost think that's the easiest bit, or the bit that's kind of done for you. Like the will, what I'm equating that with as you talk is like the impulse in the body, the action impulse that comes, right, in the body. That's also, for, even though we think we know what it is, for most people it's not clear what that is when it comes to something like anger. It's really not. It's like it's a compromised position. So actually some purity, some like purification, like being able to also amplifies the wrong word, get clearer on what that will component is too. It matters here. Like and the problem with a lot of this, and I know this, it's what makes conversations like this difficult when I go back to a therapeutic context, because the problem with this is a lot of this is not something you're just going to be able to sit and do by yourself necessarily. But not to say at all, but it's because it's unconscious. So we have to be able to find ways. Maybe you can, I shouldn't say you can't do it by yourself. You have to find ways to be able to really purposely try and make this more conscious and clear, because systems in our brain are deciding before it reaches the level of consciousness that we are not going to let you know that will is in your body. We're not going to let you feel that. And so, I think that's where somatic work really is helpful, because it's through purposely trying to just trace and stay attuned to the body that we might be able to break through some of that and bring it into consciousness. But absolutely. But I really, really love that field that you're talking about there, because there's something here about authentic resonance for me as being the thing that is, it's again the compromised position, which is always shifting and dynamic, right, between trying to be a me in the world somewhat, right, autonomy and closeness, relationship, like it's this dance back and forth that's always happening. And anger has a roundabout way of, especially when we don't learn to relate to it properly when we're younger, which I would say is like 90% of us, has a way of shifting us violently, sort of from one pole to the other. Like, you need to prioritize your autonomy at all costs in this moment. Or for other people, the flavor is the opposite. Like, don't even have a self, just be completely, giving to the other and what they need in this moment. But it's finding that balanced position, that sort of in a dynamic way that's always shifting. I think that is what is so difficult about being human. And that's why love is so important. I mean, we could bring love in here, but there was one more thing I want to say about that. Let's see if it comes to me, and I'll give it to you, Seth. Something about that, and I did want to make a link again to anger. Sorry, it's a bit messy, but because I think anger functions there too, right? So anger can be the thing that, yes, sort of erupts out of us as a way to push the other away, or does the opposite, actually kind of attack ourselves, that like self-attack that is for most people how they experience anger. As I don't really feel angry, I just sort of feel bad with myself all the time, and disappointed and sad, and sort of, oh, someone's treating me badly again, I'm such a piece of crap, like that kind of, that's like an anger turned inward. But that prioritizes sort of the other person, and then we kind of like cut ourselves off. Anyway, what am I trying to say? There's a manner in which so I think about my relationship to anger now, and I think like with my husband is just a prime example. So prior to like doing this kind of therapy for myself, there would be particular things that he would like make a comment about, and he'd say it sort of in a sarcastic, snarky way, like it had a bit of a bite to it. But it would, like, it was, certain things about certain things that that feeling of just that anxious anger, that horrible anxious anger that would just wash over me. And that was it. Like, I didn't understand it in these terms then, but I see it now so clearly. It was like the whole template of the person from my past who, was critical in these ways to me came up. And now I just saw him through that in that moment. Like, it's so clear. And all the possibility crushed down, because now there's no possibility. Now I'm just talking to this person who, and again, I wasn't aware of it in these terms, and I was a psychologist, and I would stop and I would reflect on these episodes after. I still couldn't figure it out, but I see it clear as day now. And somehow I could not make that link consciously. There was no way that you could tell me that I was seeing him through a lens of like someone that reminded me of this attachment figure, or I was just like, that's no, but it's so obvious to me now. Anyway, and so I would behave in this way, right? And then all my thinking of what's possible with him in the future was colored in that way. Now I'm going to have to learn ways to make sure I'm never in that scenario, this or that, or he's never going to be able to change. He'll never see this. He's this, he's that. These are all things that have nothing to do with him. They're to do with this like other person. And so there was all of that. And then I did my own work on this. And I came to see through, like, this is an example, through following the impulse of the anger, that if like in those, like, so I did all that work in therapy, so it cleared up a lot of the anxiety. So when he did those things and I got angry, I still get angry. I sort of like it, and it still touches a sore place. But I'm just like, oh yeah, like part of me is really pissed off about that. Doesn't like it when I get called out on that stuff. But that's it. That's the extent of it. And then I just think about, okay, what's he really trying to tell me here? Then I can go into that kind of, like thinking, how are we going to connect here? What is he like? How are we going to relate? But I can also see sometimes when it happens and it's particularly intense, I also let myself just go, oh, wow, there's like, I could just imagine, I mean, it's hard to say these things when they go online, but like, I can just see that impulse in my hand to just pick up that knife and just like, yeah. And I don't, like, I tell some people that and they're just like, that's like horrific. Like, why would you think that about someone you love? And I'm not thinking it. I'm becoming conscious of what my body, the impulse in my body is in that moment. Like, I'm just, to me, it's radical honesty. Like, it's just honesty. I know I would never do that to him. Well, maybe not yet, but I know I would never do that to him. We should probably cut that bit out.
I didn't hear anything.
Now I've got on the weird line, but like I know I wouldn't. So like it doesn't freak me out either. So what happens with some people is even the people that aren't so resistant and might actually be aware somewhere of that impulse, they get so scared by it. They're like, oh, that makes me a bad person. I really have to restrain myself and work harder to never be like in this position. And anyway, I just wanted to say all that in very simple terms, the things that cleared all that out for me, so that I actually can I guess I can try and reestablish my field in that moment as, how do I link all this together? So sometimes when he says things right now, I have my moment, and this is the authentic resonance for me. It's the somehow, in doing those things internally and feeling calm and noticing any impulse, I'm also much clearer on, is this one of those moments where I'm actually going to make more of a stand for myself and say, actually, it's not okay to, say it in those terms. I really don't like it when you say it in those terms. Or is this one that I can just let go? Or is this one that I'm probably got some remnant of that template that's still like here, and it's really nothing. He's really just saying, could you pick up the dish? Like that's really all he's saying. So
Fill out, Aspasia.
so like it's, yeah, go.
What I love is what you just did is you gave us, a real life example of this thing I was saying before. The thing that makes me angry doesn't make that person angry, but you've also done the work, and even if you hadn't done the particular work you've done, what you just demonstrated by what you said is, you know what, I kind of know myself. And I have a tendency to fall into certain traps, but because I have that tendency, especially when I go into a situation with that person where I have historically fallen into traps, I know how to turn up the volume of my attention. And then I can't remember your exact words just now, but you even kind of said, the question I ask myself is this, and it was a very specific question tuned to my situation based on my history. And so that's a piece of, I think what we can do.
Yeah.
So that's, habits, right? That's simple word to label that. We all have them, but then we can work with them. I do think it'd be interesting. I wanted to pick up on the field that Daniel was talking about, and the idea that the field expands and contracts. And also, in the first conversation the two of you had, Daniel made a comment about, you were talking about both space and time. And I can't remember the specific thing you said, but in that, one of the things you said about your husband when you were sort of in that place where you don't have the authentic resonance, or people would say triggered or something like that, you essentially described that the way I was looking at him in this moment, there was no future.
Yeah.
Right. So time also got collapsed down to like, and obviously there is a future. You're still married. It sounds like it's generally going in the right direction. But in that moment, it might feel like, oh my God, is this the end of the relationship? Is this the last time? And it's not that but in that very moment, it has that feeling. And it's just very dire. Everything is black and white to the nth degree, right? And so time can collapse, space can collapse. In terms of the work I do, which is very much in the spirit of Moshe Feldenkrais, and I've brought in other things that I've learned, what he would do is he would ask a question like, what's true for all of us? He sort of zoom out. And so one of the things he would say is, well, we all live in the field of gravity. It's like, well, what does that have to do with, well, when I feel authentic resonance, this is what gravity feels like. And when I don't feel authentic resonance, this is what gravity feels like. Yeah. We're all breathing. When I'm feeling authentic resonance, what my breath is like. And when I don't, that's what it feels like. Now, I think it's too simple to say there's two versions of my breath and there's two versions of my relationship with gravity. But I think there is something that we all do, that the way I language it is, I sense that I'm moving towards well-being right now. Or we could use the word resonance. Or I sense I'm moving away, like time is collapsing, space is collapsing. I work with clients, and I have sort of 5 things that I've put together based on, essentially my experience with Feldenkrais. So they are breath, ground, space, sound, and light. And what Daniel said fits with space. So I'll ask people, how does space feel right now? Does it feel welcoming, or does it feel a little dangerous? And in my body, if the space feels welcoming, my body is willing to expand. It's willing to or I can imagine moving over there because it feels like it's safe to move over there, or I can see a passageway. My body feels free. You know, you put me in prison, you limit the space, I'm restricted, right? But you put me in a wide open field and I'm, you know, still messed up with my childhood problems. I don't feel the wide open field. Although then again, if I have that problem and you take me out in nature, the wide open field can have a beneficial effect, right? But so space can feel welcoming and less welcoming, and my body can feel like I'm able to expand, or more like I'm actually contracting into myself. Like it almost feels like I'm pulling my ribs inwards toward my spine because I'm trying. People say I felt small. Well, you make yourself small by contracting muscles and pulling in. And as you do that, you end up restricting your breathing. You end up shortening the length of your spine. So I'll say to people, like I was shared with you, I do a meditation around anger in my program. And one of the things that I sort of invite them to feel some anger, you know, however they do that. I can't remember the exact prompt for that. But if you have anger flowing through you, is it the kind where you can feel that your spine is long and you still have a sense of dignity? Or is it the kind of anger that compresses you and like you start, right? And again, it's too simple to say, if your spine does this, therefore that. But I can tell you a lengthening spine versus a compressing spine feels totally different. One of them feels more comfortable. One of them feels, you know, so we can look at all these things.
Can I just say,
I won't go.
sorry, so just really
Yeah,
quick.
please.
No, and then please finish. I just want to jump in. But that is
Yeah.
also, at least from my point of view and my work, that is also an indicator that they really are experiencing anger there, and it's not being blocked by anxiety. So it is actually that simple. You're like, I know it's only one, but like,
Right.
can they feel that whole somatic pathway of the anger, or is what they're feeling actually that battle between the two things inside, which leads to that? So
Right.
Lovely.
Right. I mean, if we tried to describe anger as something in me that's resonating, that I could manage to allow to resonate authentically or not. I mean, a resonation is a vibration. It's back and forth.
Yeah.
I loved that when you spoke to Michael, you said anger has a sense of going up and
Yes.
anxiety has a sense of pushing things back down. And so if anything, there's a tug of war here. What Feldenkrais would call that, and I think Daniel was sort of talking about the body is doing a thing and the brain wants to, he'd call it cross motivation. He had some phrases like it. He says it's like you're trying to kiss and smoke a cigarette at the same time. He'd say things
that's
like
a
this.
party trick, that one.
Yeah, that would be
That
good,
would
right?
be a party trick.
So I can't resist. It's funny. I could be a shameless plug. I'm doing a workshop this weekend on sound. So that's one of the categories. And of course, sound is the place where we literally talk about resonance, right? But here's a few things I'll offer through the lens of sound, knowing that we could talk about many things. But as you speak to me and your words come into my body, into my experience, how do they resonate? And let's imagine that I have that expansive feeling. I'm wide open. And so then I would say my body is a really, it's a good resonant chamber right now. So when your words come in, you know, they can bounce around in there and there's nothing in my system that's resisting that. It's just containing it. And because I'm a certain shape, your words resonate a certain way. But if I'm tight, if I'm pulled in, I'm expanded, there's a way that the words get dampened, or we could say they get distorted, right? But I'm still some kind of a resonant chamber, but probably I can't find the true resonance of your words in my experience. And of course, you and I are the same but different, right? We're both individuals. So, I mean, even if we're great friends, when you introduce a new idea that I've never heard you say, that there is this moment. But if I'm just already accepting, I'm already open, curious, you know, the possibility for that resonance to be true is greater. The other thing I would say with I distinguish listening and hearing. So hearing is a sound happens and it goes into my ear and I kind of can't not hear it, because I have ears and the sound was close by. But so another distinction I make is when you hear the sound, is it noise or is it music? So if it's noise, and let's say I'm on the street and a siren goes by and it's blaring and it's way too loud, the muscles in my ear will contract to protect me. In that moment, what's actually authentic, or maybe is to keep that sound out, because that sound is actually damaging to me. But in another moment, I hear music that I like, and it's like, oh, that's delicious. I want that. I'm opening my ear to it. I'm relaxing those muscles, right? And the thing is, if you contract the muscles in your ear, or it's similar to like the sun is in your face and you squint, if you do it really hard, it's a whole body movement. It's not just those muscles in the ear. So it instantly changes the shape of space. It changes all those other categories, the breath, everything can change. Anyway, I've said many things here, but just the last thing, and this is something I offer people, is maybe a more skillful way to move through the world is to be able to hear noise, notice that I'm blocking it, and then ask, could this be music? Now, it doesn't mean I open my ears to the ambulance and I get hearing damage. Like, sometimes the best move is to get away from the loud sound. But if you're talking to me and I realize that I'm fighting your words because you're just saying something that's different than my point of view, I could notice, wait, I don't agree with you, but I don't have to block the sound of these words. I don't have to fight their presence. Anyway, let me now.
I read somewhere that is how someone dealt with a torture situation. Like, I can't remember if it was water dripping, it was some sound, some like repetitive sound or something that was dry. And they said, I just had to find a way to turn it into music. Like, it's the only way. But anyway.
Well, I'll say this quickly. I was once awoken at 2 a.m. by jackhammers out on the street below, because it's a very busy road. And I guess they figured at 2 a.m. there won't be any traffic. So forget, fuck the people.
Wake everyone up. Yeah.
But it just went on and on and on. And so I'm like, I'm not going to sleep. And then I was like, now I'm awake. I guess I'm hungry. I went to the kitchen. I started cooking. And then it was like, and then it would come in. And after a while, I was like, there's a rhythm to that sound. And then it was like, I'm cooking already. And then happened, I started dancing, right? And then it stopped. And then I was like, the dance changed. And then the jackhammer came back in. Now you do the jackhammer dance.
Yes, that's it.
Daniel's already figured it out. So
Jackhammer dance.
Pass it to you with the jackhammer dance.
Jackhammer dance, Well, that was magnificent.
So basically, like, what you put forth on the sound, the light, body, contract, to me, that is when phenomenology is actually phenomenology. And phenomenology and philosophy is basically, because what you're doing, what you did that was so beautiful is, what does my relation to an object say about the subject? And it's not arbitrary. Like, I'm experiencing the sound X way, so that says something about the subject, right? That's what phenomenology was supposed to kind of be. But because it, in my opinion, became very mental, phenomenology needs to use the whole body to think, because it's actually a philosophical method. And to make a really giant claim, I do think phenomenology is the basis of a new ontology in metaphysics. Like, because here's the reason. What must reality be like for the experience of light to be different under different subjective states, right? Like, you literally can experience an object in different ways based on if you're feeling anxiety or not. Well, what must reality be like for that to be possible? Phenomenology, if you have that experience, what are the conditions of reality, right? Well, there's a lot of people on the liminal web talking about ontological relations. There are not things, there are situations, there are relations, Vervaeke, transemergent, all of this different stuff, right? The very fact that you can get the truth of yourself by asking questions, what does the light feel like? What does the sound feel like? The object suggests that indeed relations are ontological, that relations are primary, right? And you're using the experience of the quality of the object, not for the sake of a subject-object divide, but that you're using the object to ask about the relation between the subject and the object, and your experience of the object is the doorway to that line of inquiry. But we haven't gotten, in my opinion, we haven't really gotten all the fruit we could have of that methodology, because we've primarily been using phenomenology mentally and logically versus phenomenology more so by questions of the body, which are more sensual, sound, taste, right? Most of phenomenology has been overdone by sight. You can almost say the senses of sight have been the primary unit by which people have thought, but sight too easily has a kind of tearing out. I see this and I pull it into my brain. I see the bookcase and I pull it into my brain and make it the idea of a bookcase. But there's something about touch that is more difficult to rip the phenomenon out of the world, right? The other senses don't have the same ease of ripping out, right? And so by having phenomenology primarily be sight-based, thus it then tends to serve logos, and I think the revelations of phenomenology are lost. I'm also the thing I'm also, before I forget, what you were saying about like anger and stabbing and different things, like in my opinion, to speak of Christianity really, really lost a lot of its point when people really stopped taking seriously the idea that you're a sinner. Like, if you really take that was always to me the big thing. It's like, oh, I suck. Oh, okay, so it's not surprising. And it's like, oh, look, I want to kill this person.
And live inside me. Like this.
Yeah, that's right. Like religion in a weird, there's a form of religion that can moralize you're a sinner, bad, you need to and it's used totalitarian. But there's also a way in which it's actually incredibly liberating, because then you expect it, you can look at it, you can observe it and not be anxious about it. And that's when the doctrine of sin in religion is actually a really great thing. Because of course your neighbor has moments where they want to kill their spouse. We're all sinners. You do too. We all do. Yeah. Okay. Like we can get real. And that's why Dante, it's so important Dante goes through the Inferno before he goes to the Paradiso. It's not just simply because it made the book longer. It was because literally there's no other way. If you don't take seriously that you're like a sinner, then there's no possibility of getting to authentic resonance. Because that's, I think, actually the funny thing is the basis of any possibility of authentic resonance is taking seriously that like these things come up in you. If you don't, then as soon as one comes up in you, you can't see it as yourself. It's alien. So you're anxious about it. There's an alien in me. There's an evil thing in me. And by definition, the best you can do is inauthentic resonance, right? Because there's an alien thing inside of you. But if you are a sinner, no, these aren't alien things. Like, of course you're going to feel these things. The question is simply mastering it, right? Like, it's not, and saints can sin. It's just that they feel the urges. They master it though, right? So this is where, in my opinion, religion lost, ironically, religions in wanting to not moralize, which they shouldn't. But then there's a way, sin, it's a theological debate. Sin is not ethical, sin is ontological. That's where in Christianity, when you turn sin into an ethical category versus an ontological reality, you couldn't do authentic resonance like you're describing. It led to all sorts of mistakes. Now, the question that I think about a lot, and I think it also is spoken to by what Seth was getting at, there's a really funny question, and then, so what is the body? Like, what is it? I actually think all of this begs this question. Like, okay, so what is the body then? What does it do? Right? I think if it is the case, based on phenomenology, that the most alive is a field, the most alive is outward and not contrasting, a way I have thought about it, because if relations are ontological, it's almost like the body is an antenna for fields. Like the body, not the brain, the body itself is almost like an antenna to create a field, okay? And your brain exists to maintain the antenna, not to be the antenna, but to be the engineer of the antenna. But the brain tends to try to be the antenna and kills the field. So, like, for example, it all depends on your interpretation of the body, right? So what is a fever? A lot of people say it means your body is sick. Actually, a fever is a sign your body's trying to heal itself, right? Like if your body is trying to heal itself, then your body is trying always to create a field. And what happens in anger is the field has been broken, and it's almost like the body is backed into a corner. Hey, the radio antenna is off. We got to fix it. We got to bring it back. And authentic resonance is when you repair the antenna. Like that's what happens. Like it's the moment of repairing the antenna and restoring the field effect, right? Because it is as if your body is more of a tuning fork. It's more of a resonance creator. It's not like your body is not this. You extend. There is an extension to human experience. I mean, it comes out in what Seth is saying, right? You are outward. The radio antenna is in this spatial location that is Daniel, but it would be kind of weird to reduce the radio to the antenna location. It's creating a field, right? And the field seems to be the will, the thing that is flowing, that is coming out, and intention is to monitor the health of the will in the field and to repair it if it's broke, right? But what can end up happening is it's like you have a wrench, the same wrench that could repair a radio tower could also start hitting it and break it, right? Like the same wrench, your brain, which could repair the antenna and then get out of the way, can also beat up the antenna, right? And so I think this is where, well, honestly, this is where our philosophy of what the body is a big deal. If you believe your body is trying to heal you, not that it's broken, like you're having a fever because your body's trying to heal you. You're feeling anger because you're trying to heal something. You're feeling an emotion because you're trying to do something. Well, then that means your body is good and you simply want to help it be good, right? But if you interpret what the body is doing as it's broke, then I need to think of a solution. This is what ends up happening. If you have the wrong interpretation of your body, you spend your entire life thinking of ways to fix your body versus to free your body, right? Because your body is broken. So I need to logos, technical, figure out a way to heal it, pharmaceutical, whatever technological innovation I need to do to make my broken body work. But if instead your body is for you, you just need to let it be for you and get out of its way. That's an entirely different relationship. And what the body seems to do is because you could say, well, the body wants to be healthy, it wants to survive. Yes, biologically, and then I'll pass it. Yes, the body wants to survive, but the human dimension that's more, dare I say, metaphysical, is the body wants to be a radio tower for a field. Like it wants to, so the health side of the body is biological, but it has some sort of radio antenna effect to be really kind of like metaphysical here, but it does seem to be the case just by what's said. It seems like a radio tower that creates a field or catches a field. I guess we can get into the metaphysics of if the field is in, out, or if it's always there. This could get into different things, but it has some sort of field generating effect. And the brain's role is the finding the radio station to make sure it's there, keeping the tower repaired, and then getting out of the way, right? So that the field effect occurs. That seems to be more of what the body is. The body is some kind of field creating entity. Now, again, that might need refinement or different things, but it just seems to me that it is a generator of some kind of field, and your body is always in the business of healing that field. And anger is just a moment where it's like a mouse in a corner. Like anger is the field broke. You're panicking. Like, we got to restore the field. What do? The tower's broken. There's a kind of like fix it. But then this is where habits are important, because when you get a panic situation, if you haven't done the training, if you're not prepared, rather than say, go over and get the fire extinguisher, you just kind of hit the oven with a towel and it doesn't get better. That seems to happen in anger where you're not ready for it. So, oh my gosh, the field's broke. What do? And if you're not ready for it, you have a reaction that's bad. Likewise, if you're not ready for the oven fire, you don't get the fire extinguisher and it becomes a lot worse, right? So those are some thoughts that come to mind.
Stunning. I love what you laid out there with the body and the field and the antenna. Two kind of distinct points I just want to bring in, and then I'm just conscious I've spoken a lot, so I'll pass it to you, Seth. So first of all, I'm fascinated by the body too, and what is it, and why do we have it, and why do we have it like we do? Why is it this shape? There's a lot. And I'm also, I'll do this bit first then. And I'm also really fascinated in the developmental aspect of that. Like I think about even this idea you're bringing in, Daniel, and it's actually you too, Seth, because it's on the back of what you said, about so like if this is the antenna, like the idea that we're so little, like we start off so little and there's this like rapid change in our shape and our size that takes place, and like what does that mean and how does that factor into all of this? And then we get to adulthood and we're kind of relatively stable, you know, like there's this huge change in growth and size, and then what does that mean for the baby, and like what does that mean in the womb? And because so much of this obviously is going back to the way that this gets programmed in those very first years. You know, we know that. And so if you think about the implications here, when we're talking about the body, I find that fascinating. But the other thing is, what I'm taking out of what you're both saying, I think, is something like the body, when it's in its most, like in a moment, when it's in its most, I don't know what we call it, like natural state, like most sort of unencumbered, less tense, neutral, maybe sort of state, is in a, it's only then that it's in a position to have the confidence of the experience outside of it. So like what's being experienced, right? And that's never going to be perfect and clear, because we do have a body and there is like something that all this travels through, and you know, but that position might be the best that we have. And maybe that is important too, because maybe the shape of our body and everything is there to, I don't know, morph it in some way that is relevant here. I'm sure it is. But it's from that position then that we're going to be more, to have access to this authentic resonance, because it's from that position that we're more, yeah, we may just have that, even that felt experience of the confidence that comes with, I'm clear on what I'm experiencing here to the degree that it informs what I want to do, right? Like it might not even be that it's necessarily in really beautiful logical language, but like you know, there's and that's maybe the clarity component. I think it's actually maybe the felt sense of the lack of all the usual resistance, like the felt sense of actually just being in the position that, yeah, like there's not a part of your body trying to fight something down, or there's not the tension. I'm just going to call it tension in a broad sense. It's because the tension's not there, the processing doesn't have to go through all these other layers and this battle, which could take longer, just have a different felt quality to it, could come with, yeah, like these conflictual motivations that are fighting. Yeah, so anyway, that's what I wanted to say. It sounds like to me what's happening here is we're talking about the body being in a position of least resistance, perhaps, or something, which is what allows the authentic resonance, or is part of the authentic resonance, because that is the felt sense of, because it's quite hard to get clear on exactly what we're talking about with the authentic resonance. It's kind of like an umbrella term, and then it has its little components. But the bit I'm really honing in on is that felt sense of confidence or peace in the whatever you're experiencing or deciding in that moment. That, yeah, to the point that, yeah, and I guess that would be linked to the idea of that somehow straddles the divide between what is good for me, what is good for you, what is good for the relationship, like that it also somehow gets those things right in some manner that is outside of us having to tortuously think it through, perhaps even. It's just there and available to us, right? We can kind of, we have access to that move, because sometimes I think too with these moves, it's not clear to me in the moment how it was that was necessarily going to be good in all these ways, and it ends up, maybe it is the best compromise position. Anyway, I digress. Yeah, that's what I'm hearing, but I'll pass it to you, Seth.
Well, what I'd like to say is, if the body is an antenna, then it's not just tuning to itself. It's tuning to all the other bodies, right? And if the body is an antenna and it's tuning to the other bodies, or even if the body is just part of the anatomy of this field, right? I mean, it starts to get into stretching our definitions of self, at least certainly outside of the typical, you know, scientific materialist kind of context. But if it's true, we can go in all kinds of directions with authentic resonance. But I was thinking, if you imagine someone who, let's imagine a person in a highly dynamic context. So two versions of this came to mind. The first I thought of, let's say it's some kind of a conference. You were just traveling and you went to a conference, Aspasia. So it's colleagues, you know, you have something in common, but you came from Australia to the United States. There's this person who's over here. Oh, that's the keynote speaker. They have a particular resonance. Here's the person, you know, from the hotel that's hosting the conference, you know. And yet imagine Aspasia is walking into this room. There's 100 different people. They're all resonating differently. But she also could walk into the room and look around and say, well, I know what the context is. It's this conference. I can make certain assumptions. But she notices this person is dressed very well. This person doesn't seem to care about their appearance so much. This person is speaking, seems like to me, a little too loudly. You know, you're making all of those kinds of discernments. Now, if we just imagine that you flow through the room and in the course of the hour, you talk to 25 people, and everyone is, of course, impressed at the presence that Aspasia has, right? But, you know, you're adjusting. So resonance with this person and then that person and then the next person is different each time. But if we imagine that kind of a skillful, oh, and let me just say the more fun version would be imagine a teenager at school in the lunchroom and like, well, I don't know, maybe they're the popular kid that for some reason no one resents and everyone likes. How do they do it? They talk to the athletes, they talk to the nerds, they, you know, talk to the teacher, whatever. But they're flowing from one state. But you would have to assume there is some kind of baseline that they're working from, right? And again, it might be like when I said in the example with you at the conference, you are very clear on the context. And unless, you know, the roof starts to fall in or something radical happens, you know that you can continue in conference mode wherever you go in this room, right? And then you might even start to, you speak to 3 or 4 people and you say, you know what? The workshop everyone's talking about is that workshop. And then you start listening for the sound of people talking about that particular workshop. And so these kinds of things are happening. So just to say, because if there's any tendency where a conversation starts to make authentic resonance into something like winning the lottery, where, you know, all of the stars have to align. I mean, there's a way that we can be in a, I mean, I've recently encountered a particular meditation form where the main instruction is to remain uninvolved. So you sit there, your eyes are closed, but you're not trying to just notice your breath. You're not trying to notice your thinking, but you're trying, and you're not trying to quiet the body. So you're noticing everything that's happening, but you're not getting involved. And so this is, you know, and then when you finish meditating and go into life, you're going to get involved in things. But if you know, the person who I've had a history of fighting with says a certain thing, if the very first thing that happens is I don't get involved, there's just that moment of me observing, and then maybe the anger comes up, but I have this, the word that they, I'm reading a book about this form of meditation. The author is Charlie Aubery. There's a group called Evolving Ground right now. I just want to mention it because it's a thing that, you know, in these kinds of dialogues, this is where I found out about it. So it's a thing that people watching this video could look up, Evolving Ground. But they talk about spacious clarity. And I'll just mention one other distinction that they make, and it's all very new to me. But in the world of meditation, they say there's some forms that are called renunciative. And what you do is you sort of go in a cave and you leave this world and you're enlightened in some definition of it, but it's not an involved enlightenment. It's, you know, and then what they're talking about is, well, we're interested in a kind of, and they don't use the word enlightenment, but they say, could we be in the world with spacious clarity? So it's a kind of okayness with whatever may happen, but there's still a capacity to respond. So it's like you're uninvolved until the moment that now I'm going to involve myself in this way because I see how to involve myself. So I'm kind of borrowing some some words from people I've just recently heard, but I think it captures something about how, even though I have no idea what's about to happen, there's certain things I can learn in my life that we might use the word poise, that give me a certain poise walking into the unknown situation.
You like that? Daniel, you go for it.
I think it's magnificent.
So I'm now wondering, you mentioned also you mentioned cross motivation. Before I forget, I wonder if authentic resonance is the opposite of cross motivation, and inauthentic resonance is when cross motivation hits an equilibrium. Like what ends up happening, I think, like what most people do is they find a way to get their cross motivation to hit a kind of equilibrium where the two things that are crossing stop, like they stop, and they try to live their whole life that way. And maybe that's inauthentic resonance, is an equilibrium of cross motivations, whereas authentic resonance is the opposite of cross motivation, where you just have a flowing motivation. So maybe there's something there. I'm also thinking of the great example, the point you just made on a radio with many, whatever the human is, unless the human is of a dimensionality that is reducible, must ultimately, if accurately described by a metaphor, must be a mixed metaphor. Because otherwise it would be reductionist of the human being, right? So maybe the human being is some kind of like radio instrument, like some sort of antenna instrument, because this idea of walking into the room and you have a note like A, and you're just able to make the A work. That person's a D, and the room is an E, and you're able to connect with the note to make a harmony. It is of great interest that in classical thought, they talked about the harmony of the soul all the time, and talked about music, and all of that was the prime language to describe the good life, honestly, and the healthy individual. It was musical. That was the metaphor they liked, was a musical language. And there is something about the body that's like an instrument. You know, they even describe the vocal box, like there's the resonance box. The body seems to be kind of like an instrument, right? And so when you're talking about that poise, to me, that's like, no matter what, you're giving off your note, and whatever note you can encounter, you're able to do exactly what you said. I hear noise, but what if it's music? Let me, before I turn my note off, because I believe it's making cacophony, well, maybe, hold on, my A encounters this F, and it sounds like a cacophony and noise, but maybe it's music. That seems to be the move. And actually what you just described, when you described that with the jackhammer, that ability to say, I'm hearing noise, I'm going to block it, but could this be music? That is, to bring in Hegel, that is Hegel's move of freedom, because what you're doing is that's called the negation. You're negating the determination to give yourself space to choose if it's a necessity for your freedom. So you say, I'm going to negate I'm going to block it, I'm going to negate hearing it, but not to get rid of it, but to ask the question, should I reconcile with it? Should I identify with it? And that is what I hear you saying when it's like, could this be music? For Hegel, that is freedom, and there's actually no other freedom. Like, freedom is not freedom from determination. Freedom is found in gaining yourself the capacity to choose a determination as possibly a necessity for freedom. So I make a distinction between determination and necessity. And a determination is basically wall, door. There's a lot of things that are in front of you, okay? So determinations. You're in a body. You can't fly. There are determinations, right? Hegel said freedom is when you're actually identify with not being able to fly. Freedom is not gaining the ability to fly. Freedom is when you come to resonate with the determination you can't fly, and you actually reconcile with it. And therefore, the determination no longer feels like a restriction, but it actually feels like what is necessary for you to exist. And then you identify with that thing that you are, you reconcile with it, and thus you are free. Because if you choose your restrictions, then your restrictions are no longer restrictions. They're definitions of your freedom. They are what afford the possibility of your freedom, right? But that requires the ability to negate, block, and ask, could this be affording me freedom? That is the ultimate capacity. I actually kind of want to say that that is the pre-skill of authentic resonance, right? The ability to choose what you choose. That's what you're doing, right? Like, you're literally choosing what you choose. It's like, I'm going to create a distance between the noise and myself so that I can choose it. You're creating a space between yourself and the noise, so now it is choosable as music. So you're choosing to afford yourself a choice because of the blockage that then opens a space of you to change your identification with it, right? What is that? That's a tuning fork. That's like tuning the music. That's tuning the radio station. That's tuning your instrument. Like if the body is an instrument that makes music or a radio instrument or whatever language it is, because it does seem to have some sort of, because then the question is like thoughts feel like signals, right? Like there's something where you don't really necessarily choose every you think. So it's like a radio instrument. It's a mixed metaphor or something. I'll stop on that. But the point is, the brain seems to be more about tuning and finding the note and creating the space of asking, is this music? The brain is not about creating the music. The brain is about tuning the note. It is not, but the body is creating the note. The body is already creating the field. The body is already creating the resonance. The brain is the ability to, when you encounter a resonance that creates a cacophony effect, the brain goes, wait, hold on. Let's ask ourselves, could this be music? That's freedom. And that's the possibility. That's choosing what you choose. That is the possibility of authentic resonance. Those came from, but Aspasia, please.
Well, yeah, what's coming to my mind is something here about the heart. Like to me, it seems like the heart is the place of the spaciousness. Like if we can have the spacious heart, then that seems somehow to be coming up for me now as being important here. So that yes, the brain is obviously involved in the tuning. I was thinking of like a conductor, but then you said tuning.
Sure.
That was much better. No. But there's something that because I would actually say from a psychodynamic perspective that there are multiple notes going on at right, and perhaps it's more so which is the one that is going to take prominence, or how might they be brought together, or something integrated. I mean, we talk about integration in my work. How might, and it's only through really integrating those motivations and that system that you get to have clarity. It's not by sort of choosing one over the other. Anyway, there's something about, because love is so relevant in all of this. And so I'm just thinking as I'm trying to bring all this together, something about the spaciousness, because I agree. Being able to experience that spaciousness inside, or something of that nature, is the thing that holds us, and is again the opposite of the tension, which tries to push us down into a dot, you know. To me, that is just always linked with the heart and the loving kind of stance, because that goes always. It's not just, you know, self-love and other, and like it's just that is the container through which I think you can have as many competing motivations and emotions as you want. I think so long as it's kind of being sent through that prism, or somehow that is involved, that is what gives rise to making the move or not making the move, or doing the thing, and the confidence perhaps too. And so there's something here about the heart being blocked in all of this. And so bringing that into the equation here, maybe as something to do with the tuning fork or conductor or something. And how it is that, well, in terms of the field, our capacity to be doing that with others who are doing that as well. And I just want to bring that in.
Yeah, if you think of a person whose demeanor tends to aggravate a lot of people, right? And then you find the one person who's just willing to sit with that person that no one else can stand. I think it's something like love, right? And probably if we asked them, you know, how could you possibly listen to that story? They tell it all the time and they're so this and that. First of all, you're revealing something about yourself as you complain about it. But the person might say, well, I just noticed, you know, I mean, they might say something so simple as, I just noticed that they were another human being, right? And it's the only requirement for me to listen is, oh, you see the humanity. But I think it's really useful. I felt like you were doing this there for a moment. If anyone listening, if you think of someone in your life who it's just no problem, you love them. Or if you think of someone in your life, it's just no problem, they love me. Every time I walk in the room, I feel loved by them. When you're in that place, if something's noise and you'd rather it be music, I think that's easier. I think it's an easier switch because I'm filled with love right now. It's just like, oh, that person just made a remark that wasn't so great, but who cares? I'm in love. It's just like, and it doesn't have to, in love makes us think of romantic love, but the parent who will just be with the child who's screaming for hours, and you wonder why they don't seem to be the least bit irritated. They're just so clear on how much they love the child, right? And so that's why they might be noticing the decibel levels in their ears. They might be, they might be taking a toll on some level because the situation is not as nice as if the child was sleeping or saying, I love you, or let me draw you a picture. But there's a way that, yeah, I think, and the problem, it's not a problem with love, but the problem is when we talk about love, we go in all of these just romanticized directions. But John Vervaeke often uses a very technical term, right? But I think it's a good one. He says it's something like reciprocal opening, right? So if we think of the field, or we even think of the feeling of the pores of my skin can be open versus they can be closed, like if I'm cold or, something like that. It's like if I'm opening and you're opening, there's a kind of a feedback loop that goes, and we might call that love, but it's also, there's this incredible resonance, right? And I would even dare to say, just this is, I'll put this out as a question. So it's a bit of a flip, but if we go back to anger, there was something you said, Daniel, about, anger seems to break the space and I need to heal it. But what came to mind is like, if actually we can make the bridge. So if you have Mama Bear and her cub, and then someone comes along and tries to do something to the cub, the anger will take care of that person. And we might even say it's based in love, or that's that thing about anger and care, right? That what the Mama Bear does might be horrible to witness, but that might be authentic resonance. Like, so I don't think you intended this, but I wouldn't want to say that anger is outside of the field that we call authentic resonance. But what would seem to be obvious, it's probably a global phenomenon on the planet now, that we all just have this association that anger is never good. And so I think there are those people who know how to channel anger. But I think the average person is kind of afraid of anger. And when the moment comes and you need to act like Mama Bear, some of us can't do it. And that there's a moment where authentic resonance looks like unleashing all of the animal inside. And that is precisely the correct thing to do. And even if I never meet that moment in my life, just the fear of meeting that moment might be something I carry with me as that anxiety at all times. Yeah.
No, magnificent. So one of the reasons why I think the mystery of anger really needs to be focused on is because of a very odd quality of it. And what if I said to you, this person never got angry, there'd actually be a part of you that would wonder if they were moral. But if I said this person never got envious, this person never got hateful, you'd go, well, of course, they're a saint, right? What's very interesting is there's something about anger where it's hard to imagine a saint never getting angry, because that would mean they didn't care about anything, right? So mystery poses a very interesting question in that if you get rid of it, you seem to get rid of love. But then if you have it, love seems to be in danger.
Oh, that's weird. So you have to have this thing to have love, but if you have it in its very affording the possibility of love, simultaneously threatens it. Oh, now that's not the case with envy. That's not the case with hatred. That's not the case with greed. I can go on. Anger is so unique because if you get rid of it entirely from your life, it seems to also get rid of the possibility of love from your life, right? This is why this honestly too, like when people talk about the meaning crisis and nihilism, right? And they talk about it as the loss of religion, death of God, and different things. I actually think the meaning crisis in many respects is fundamentally a motivation crisis. Like, how do people get motivated? And that means it is fundamentally at its root unable to address the mystery of anger, because I think the energy of anger is tied to the question of human motivation, care, love, and the very thing to make us work. If you have no capacity for anger, then you could believe in God all you want, and life will lack a certain motivational thrust, right? There is something about anger that is a revelation of a kind of, because the other problem is, like, anger is true, deepest emotions are multi-geometrical shapes. Like anger, it's not a linear, like anger here, it's like love, anger, like whatever the deepest core of the human being is more like a object that has many shapes and sides, and love is the object that is the human. One side of it is love, and the other side of the same object is anger. And if you pull them apart, the object dies and the soul goes with it, right? This and focusing on the phenomenology of anger is so interesting to me because it makes undeniable the fact that the human subject is a meta-geometrical entity versus a point, that it is a multifaceted phenomenon. And we say that, we often will say that, but then actually fall back into dualistic language, because the opposite of geometry in the Leibniz sense, as I'm describing it, is kind of a dualism. Mind and body are split, right? If you say the mind and body are somehow interrelated, you're saying it is a higher dimensionality, right? And so you're saying it's a meta-geometrical shape, to use a fancy term from Leibniz. That's what you're saying. But the weird thing of it is the experience of the mind seems to be distinct from the body when you think about it, and yet it's not. Well, yeah, when you look at one side of a square, it seems to be the only side, but there's only one side of the square because there's another side you're not seeing, right? But they're connected in geometry, right? So the mind and the body are geometrically connected. They're the same thing, but you can look at one side of it that can create the effect that it's two-dimensional, not three-dimensional, let alone four-dimensional, right? That's what we're doing to ourselves all the time, because the brain has the imaginative capacity to make that mistake. Imagination gives you the ability to imagine you're two-dimensional versus four-dimensional, and imagination is the very thing that can make you make the dualistic mistakes, because it is also the very thing that can make life dream. Imagination is just like anger. If I said to you, you never had imagination, oh great, I can't get lost in problematic error. I could only have empiricism. If there's no imagination, there's only empiricism, but then there's no, like, you know, imagination, creativity, and hope, right? Anger is also a revelation of the multi-geometrical truth of the human being, just like imagination and all of the deepest things. But the reason why focusing on these particular case studies, I think, is particularly useful is because you can operate in one-sidedness, as Hegel would say, with envy. Envy's bad. Okay, end of conversation. All right, great. Greed is bad. Done. Cool. Anger? It denies, it smacks you in the face. It says, go deeper. Go deeper. And when you go deep, when you poke on it, then you find out the whole human subject is a metageometrical phenomenon. And yeah, like maybe instead of note, the human makes song. Every individual is a song-making entity. You make an entire song, and then when the body and the mind make a song, not just a note, we are songs. And when we encounter, the environment makes a song, the other person makes a song. There are many creation myths that start with it all being sung into existence. One thinks of Aslan. That does seem to be what we're song making. And when you have two songs play at the same time, you have country music and Black Sabbath or something with Led Zeppelin. It sounds like a cacophony, but what if this could be music? Pause. What if this could be music, right? Like, what if you could do that? So then, like, the question, so what is, the body seems to want to make a song. Like, it just seems like it wants to make a song and it wants to harmonize. It seems to be always moving itself in, well, this is like teleology and Aristotle and Plato. The whole being moves towards song making. It just wants to make a song. I mean, what is the body? Like, what does the body want in a way? What is your body wanting? It doesn't want blockage. It wants a song. I mean, to use, I guess, Piper's language, there is something about the body that almost wants a festival. Like, everything in us wants to find a festival. And what's a festival? Where flow, time, you stop thinking about time. There's something about anxiety that makes time feel long. Whereas when you're in a festival and you're having a great time, time flies. The body is trying to find duration in the Bergson and move beyond sequence, right? All that is in you seems to be seeking a certain festivity, right? A certain self-forgetfulness, right? The body is looking for the song. The problem is the mind can imagine it doesn't exist and tell the body it doesn't exist, so the body gives up. That's the problem. Our very imagination that there is no such thing as a festival, we can then impose upon our body. Seth, please.
I just want to see, could I ask you a question?
Yes.
I so enjoy your body resonating with ideas. Like you have a way that is uniquely you. I mean, so do others have their ways, but your whole body is there when you speak. It's so gestural, and it's so and I feel there's something authentic in your resonance right now. And so I just kind of want to ask you how it feels, because I feel like what you're doing, another person would censor. And so I forgive me for being so forward, but I feel like there's something you're doing that, if there's any words you can put to it, would be I'm just very curious.
No, it's a good question. I guess I forget about, there is a kind of festivity. It does feel it feels important. It feels like it wants to live. It feels like it wants to sing. It feels like it wants to create a festival, create a resonance, right? And that this is what people want, and that people are seeking, and that, but then you don't think of it as wanting, you just find yourself in it because you get your brain out of the way of your body. Like, it's not really something you're like, oh, everyone ought. It's not an ought. It's an expression that is always latent, that is trying to come out. And I think that is
So does this feel like your body is speaking more than your mind, would you say?
I would say so, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say so.
Bonnie Roy uses this phrase sometimes: the words come out of my mouth like the dance comes out of my body, or something like that. So it's like, of course, we all know there's a brain in there and it's doing something, but it just doesn't feel like, I don't know, that thing I do when I try to sound clever or whatever. Anyway, I'm kind of dying to hear what Aspasia is about to say, because I know it's going to be good.
Please.
No, I'm so glad you asked that, Seth, because I think that all the time when I talk with you, Daniel. You have a freedom about you when you really get into talking about something that I sense that authenticity, but I also just think looks so so wonderful to experience. Like, it's something to behold. I will say that. I can relate a little. I do get animated, but I tend to somehow whack things by mistake. So I have to make sure I've got a clear path around me. It's not my anger coming out. What am I going to say? Hold on. What are these notes I've written here? A quick note on what you were saying about the imagination too there, Daniel, and how obviously it can lead us astray. It can be part of the flattening kind of, but also it is our ability to do that allows us to get in touch with the action impulse outside of it actually playing out. So we can actually do that kind of thing. We can actually look at what it wants to do before having the consequences in the real world of it. That is part of the, I guess, the power of our ability to think in that way. This is a really massive tangent, so I'll say it quickly and I'll get back to the point. But something that's been on my mind a lot is I sort of feel like when you were listing those things, Seth, about breath, ground, space, sound, light, there's this other thing for me, something to do with like access to the imaginal screen or something. I don't know what to call it. But and this might just be me, but I seem to, when I'm truly just relaxed and I'm not anxious or tense and I'm not really thinking about anything, there's like this imaginal screen, and just all this stuff flickers really, really quickly on it. And it's like super, super detailed, like visual, super detailed, like, I don't know, just like a shell on a beach, and then like just random, and it just goes really fast. I don't know, there's something in that I feel like is some sort of, I don't know what I'm accessing there. Maybe psychosis, I don't know. But like it's there's something.
Let me just briefly say, so breath, ground, space, sound, light, one of the things I like to underline is we can experience all of them as being on the inside or being on the outside. So the breath moves in and out. The ground is under my feet, but I also include the skeleton because it's the solidity inside of me. There's clearly space inside my body. Even if there's stuff in there, I can think about the space in my body, the surrounding space. And sound comes from my body. It comes from the world. But so the one that I had to think about was light. What's the internal light? Because it's just dark in there. But I think the internal light is the imagination. I mean, again, this is kind of, let's just be clear, like Seth kind of made up a thing with 5 words in it, and so then he has to explain to you why it makes sense. I mean, you could say it's arbitrary, and I think there's something about the thing we're calling authentic resonance that makes us no longer distinguish between inside and outside, right? But I think, you know, I can close my eyes and see things, and it could just be black, but I could, you know, especially if have that particular talent, I can put a movie in my head, or I could just be in conversation with you, but I could be aware of an internal image or thought that's there that I can see on the inside. You can't see it because it's not visible to you, but it's visible to me. Anyway, I just wanted to sort of give you that piece in response to what you're saying. And then
I love it. I think you're formulating the Dellinger method, or the Dellinger.
Maybe, yeah. I call it musicality of being. So I appreciate all the musical metaphors.
Beautiful. So going back to this idea of love, and yeah, it's tricky. So there's something about the bringing together, the integrating the feelings together. So when I notice that I feel anger, if I get in touch with the full extent of that primal rage it comes with, which is just comes with, some people can split off and they only notice that, but it's the noticing the other part of the equation. So some people call that other set of feelings love, right? Some people call it like positive feelings. It's the feelings of, because it depends, you know, it's the feelings of wanting to connect, care, compassion, might just be liking something. If we just call it, anger is noticing I don't like or don't want, and the positive feelings is I do like, I do want. So quite often we have competing motivations. There's one part of us that really wants this and likes it, or this person or this moment, and the other part really doesn't. And that's quite true with relationships when things have not gone well early on, because our motivational systems have been traumatized. And so on the one hand, you know, as a functioning adult, I really want a close, committed relationship, but the little part inside of me that learned that's the most dangerous thing I can ever do for my selfhood is pulling me away violently and convincing me this person is going to be like this, like that, making me paranoid, making me very angry. Right? Anyway, so the integrating of those two things is important. There's something in addition to that, though, when I'm talking about love in this context and the heart. It's almost like the container or something. It's like maybe it's loving. It's to do with the way we then go about acting or being. I guess it's the space within which we can integrate those two things. It's hard to I guess so. Let me give you an example. If we go back to that idea of the mother with the baby, or the father, I should say, it wasn't just the mother, the parent with the baby, and the baby is screaming for hours on end. For lots of people, and this happens a lot with you know, postpartum anxiety and depression and psychosis, and for lots of people, they are really, really angry when that is happening. Like they are being fired up inside. There's something about the screaming sound, or there's something about my baby rejecting me, or there's something about like, I'm so sleep deprived and I have to give my all to this other, right? It can actually be really anger inducing as well. That is, but obviously that's their child. And they love their child, and they're responsible for their child, and they're driven to do everything they can to protect this child from any threat. So the part inside that notices the power of my anger as a threat is then going to go on overdrive. And then you're in this horrible anxious cycle inside while you're sitting there holding your child who's screaming. And all you want to really do is just be there for it. But all these systems are just on overdrive inside. So that I just think that's important to draw out, is that actually getting really clear on both parts of that equation can be useful for new mothers, new fathers, whoever. That for some people, it can be quite normal to just notice that also part of you doesn't like it. Part of you might, and if you really look at it, part of you might might notice impulses towards the baby. And that's really confronting to ever notice yourself, right? But actually,
it's really skillful to say, I'm a complete mess right now. Like that would be a skillful thing to notice. And like, maybe it's time to just pass the baby to my spouse.
Yeah. I'm flooded at this point. That's right. That's right. but also I think some of it is the normalizing and the not judging. So it's the going, it's actually completely normal for a mum to sit here and feel like, you know, it's not just the picture perfect thing of, you know, a loving mother would never think like feel this way or whatever. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside, but there is something about, I just want to go back to that thing about the heart, because I haven't got it clear in my head yet. It's like an additional stance, or like kind of, I mean, I think of it like a relational safeguard. It's like this point through which we take decision on action or something, or we relate to the world or something. If we can do it from that place, as opposed to all these other things that come in to fill up that space if we don't. All these old templates and all these other like, I don't know, it's like the primary motivator. Maybe primary is not right. The ultimate motivator. It's like we look at all the first, like the different motivations that are going on under the surface and get some clarity on them. But ultimately it's then kind of, it's something through which we can then take decision. Maybe this is authentic resonance. I don't know what I'm trying to say exactly, but there is like loving, there's like a loving stance in the world that I think we can, when our fields are coming into relation with one another, maybe they're searching for the other ones that are also coming, like have a more open kind of loving stance. It's not about the details of exactly what the person's feeling, or like, you know, it's just that it's the recognition that maybe there's an openness in a particular way, an openness to connectedness, reciprocity, whatever, but to a certain extent too, I think. Like, I don't know, maybe it's that, you know, it's the recognition that there's someone else there that in that moment has also got the settings on in the same place or something. I don't know. It seems important, this kind of loving stance, because I think that is something that it doesn't matter about the specifics of the individual in that moment, or how you relate to anger, or what you're feeling in that moment, or where you are. That is the thing that is maybe more the universal that we could talk about, is how does one show up in a manner that signals to others that there is authentic resonance occurring, or I think that's what it is. When I walk into that room of people, if I have my pick of whoever I want to go and talk to, say, in some perfect world, everyone's just standing there, right? And I am in that open sort of authentic resonant state, and that, you know, that's the sort of connection I'm looking for. How does my body guide me? Like, what is the, like, it to the person who would be most fitted to that? Something like that. And so I'm just trying to put words to that. I kind of call that like a mutual loving kind of stance. It's like a taking as a starting point that we're both working from there. And I think ultimately that's what it's like especially in a long-term committed relationship, when you're in conflict. It's like, you know, it's not whether or not you tell me what you're happy with or you don't. It's not even the specifics of the words you pick. It's, are we both engaging in this under the true firm belief that we are trying to connect better, that we want to love and take care of each other and our individual selves? Like, are we both there and really committed to that? Is that where we're operating from? And then, you know, you can tell me things about me that I do that really upset you, and I might have that thing of, oh, I'm resistant to hearing that about myself, but we're there doing it through this, you know, you know what I'm trying to say. I'm less likely to see it as, oh, now you're just trying to do the thing that hurts me, or I'm less likely to walk away like my body might want me to do, slam the door, or whatever it is. We're much
Sounds like love can become this vehicle for shared awareness.
yeah.
Like, we're both watching our patterns, and we're both kind of, yeah.
So I hope some of that made.
No, magnificent. There is something about love that is observing a clearing in which their music can come out. Because there's also, like, so for example, if you're a field and you're a song, when you come up to someone and you love them, it's almost like your field or song kind of wraps around them like a hug, creates a certain clearing where their note can come out, and then we can figure out how to harmonize with it, right? So there's something about holding, like the field holds the other. And there's something about love that a language of love tends to be kind of observing,
You observe, which is interesting because religion, observe, ritual, observe is not merely sight, but it says, I see you, but it's deeper than I'm looking at you, right? So there's something where the heart seems to observe, right? And there's also something, it's almost like if you're coming up when you're playing the violin and you love someone, you keep playing, but you soften a little bit. You maybe just move to a secondary note where they jump in and now you've made room for them. So you're making space for them, but it seems like love makes space for, but doesn't retract.
Yeah.
But you would, but it's similar, right? Because it seems like you're retracting in love, you're pulling in, but actually you're making space for, so they can be part of and participate in your expansion and they, right? So it's a withdrawal for the sake of affording versus a withdrawal to become a point, a withdrawal to escape, right? So in love, there's a certain withdrawing to afford a new harmony that is more expansive than would have been possible without the love. But it has a quality of seeming like, but this would make sense that why it is that in love, you can have the retraction, right? It is in loving relationships you have the retraction. Well, because it's the same motion. It's a withdrawing, but in love, it's a withdrawing to afford the harmony, where in hurt, of which only exists by love, it's a withdrawal that doesn't get connected to a harmony. So then it's a withdrawal into versus withdrawal to merge with into a greater song, right? But since it is the same motion, that's why it is in love that you get the movement to the point, which is also the making space for the new music, but it's the same motion. So that's why I think you get this trouble. And the heart seems to be making space for, but this is another metageometrical point. The same act, the heart seems to be in the business of tuning the body to make space for in the field the other, right? The same act of making space for is the same act of moving toward becoming a point. Same thing. That's the problem. It's the same activity, just like anger is the same thing that makes energy possible. This, like we were saying before, it's the same imagination. The act of making space for is a Schrodinger's cat with the act of withdrawing into. Therefore, if you're going to have love, you're going to have the possibility of retracting in. There's no way not to have that risk. To be human is a risky business. And so I think the heart is this activity to afford space. And if they pick up the note and resonate with you, well, like the violin that makes space for the piano is enhanced when the piano comes in. It's as if the violin didn't withdraw at all, right? Because it's now making the song with it. It did withdraw in a sense because it stopped playing for the piano, but in a great work of art, it's as if it didn't stop. It's as if the violin carries on with the piano even while it's not playing. That effect is the making space for, that in an odd way the violin continues in even while it's not playing, because it turns out music is actually is made of silence as well, right? Like you can't have music if there's no silence. So the violin's silence is a musical note. That is a note with the note of the piano, right? So that's where the heart is in that business. There's a few more things. I do also, please.
Very quick, and please keep going. But that's authentic resonance too, I think. So it's the your own discernment of that move, what it's in service of, which is it being motivated by? Is it the making the space? It's actually an invitation. It's a connecting. It's a loving. Or is it the withdrawal and for other reasons because you're just anxious and cutting the other off? But keep going.
Well, it's beautiful because it's the moment where you at the violin choose to stop playing and the piano keeps going and you go, perfect.
Yes.
Like it's perfect. Whereas inauthentic resonance is when you stop, you're like, everyone hates me. I'm bad. The piano's playing. It's as if a relationship, but actually the experience is inauthentic, right? But it's that moment of silence that then you continue in the note of the other that creates an authentic resonance. It creates a harmony. I definitely think, like when you were talking, just as a few more notes. So imagination, in its very capacity to reduce, to see from a different angle, that runs the risk of reductionism, makes it why it's useful for repairing. Because if you want to repair something, you focus on it, right? So reductionism is great for the sake of repairing, The problem is, in the act of reduction, you can forget the whole, and that now you've got a problem, right? Reduction is supposed to repair. Imagine is to repair, not to get lost in, but then you've got to remember that it's for that. But the very thing that could repair could also then destroy. The same thing can do it, right? It's all multi-geometrical. I think
Guilt is a great example of that too. It's like guilt is
Yes.
specific. It is meant to be specific because it's meant to motivate repair, right?
Yes.
What a lot of people experience these days is shame, right?
Yes.
And you're just tortured by it because there's nothing. It's just not really about anything in particular, and there's not really anything you can do about it. But anyway, yes.
But this is the point. Reductionism, like in science or anything, is actually an incredibly useful tool of repair. Reductionism became so destructive, as Vervaeke and everyone talks about, because it became a method of determining the whole. Well, no, it's about repairing the whole. It can't be the whole itself. If you make it the whole itself, you've lost it. So then we've gotten in trouble. Science is about repairing the human, not reducing the human to just a merely biological structure, right? Like what was supposed to repair the human from, say, the wars in religion, conspiracy, and all of that in the Enlightenment actually then came to replace the human, right? So all of these things were supposed to be, like you're saying, mechanisms of repair that became idols, honestly. They became like idols. I think also, so there's that problem. There's also something that should be noted on this tendency to go, oh, the mother is feeling all this, these, like you were saying, these different emotions, you should hand it off. I do think it would be a different topic. I think one of the reasons we make people feel like there's something wrong with them if they're not perfect, like the mother's supposed to feel shame, is because then they can't bother me. Like, if they're perfect, then they're not going to need me, and I don't have to worry about them, right? So what you do is you create an ethic of perfection or an ethic of being able to handle it, which is ideologically beneficial because it means that no one should bother you, right? So there's a way in which also, unfortunately, if I were to say, like I was saying with Christianity, if you have a robust doctrine of sin, then you need to, be there for the sinners, right? But if you start saying, well, a true sinner is going, that means you're blessed. Well, I don't have to worry about the sinners anymore, right? Because if I am, they're not doing what they're supposed to do, right? So there's unfortunately, I think, a tendency to use perfection as a way to escape the other, which then ironically means you are acting in a manner that negates the very purpose of your existence in creating fields. So because you're not willing to face that negativity, you actually self-efface. And that's where, not facing sin is ironically damnation. Like, actually, the great irony is like taking seriously imperfection and sin, which would sound like damnation, is actually the only way to avoid it, right? Because you're actually then dealing with the truth. So I think that happens too much as a mistake. I think also, like, again, the heart and the body on this idea of what is it? And it seems to have some sort of telos of musicality, some sort of telos of wanting to move toward a festival, move toward music, move toward a certain liveness. When you observe the human, it is not merely wanting to survive, it's wanting to live. And it does that without you even thinking about it. Like, it just seeks it, right? I think we were talking about this at the net because we've made a mistake when we talk about telos, and I bring this up because classically they saw everything as having movement. Like, metaphysics was a study of the movement of things in of themselves, right? And so they had a music in their very teleology. The language of music and teleology go together, right? So what's the difference between expectation, image, idea, and telos, right? Because here's the problem. We today conflate telos with expectation and even purpose, right? Classically, these were not the same. You could only know a thing's telos, which means the way it moves toward music, by observing it, which of course by definition means what? Relationship, which of course by definition means what? Love. Classically speaking, you could not know something you didn't love because you couldn't know its telos, because telos must be experienced. The thing must, in its afford to you what its telos is. You can't know it without observing it. It has to give it to you. It has to show it to you. It has to come forth from it, right? So the only way to know is to love. And the word know and love used to go together, and we separate it. The reason for that is because you don't know a thing unless you know its telos, the way in which its music comes out. And the only way to know that is to observe it, to make space for it, to love it. We replace telos with idea. We replace telos with expectation or image. You do not need a relationship with a thing to have an expectation for it. So logic, in order to make itself God over Eros and Thymos, ultimately, the mind, to make itself God over the body, convinced itself that telos and expectation and purpose were similes. And it then decided I can know a thing's purpose in terms of ideas, thinking, not through observation. By doing that, you actually lost the possibility of seeing things as things you need to make space for, to let their music come out from. I, in fact, just know everything once I know its definition. The definition replaced music. Yeah. And so everything now is a definition that I can define, and that means I know its purpose, when in the past you couldn't know the thing's purpose unless you made space for it to sing to you. So of course you have a meaning crisis. A meaning crisis is where you treat everything's purpose as its definition that you can logically know, when classically you only know the meaning of a thing once it sings to you. And the only way it sings to you and makes music is if you make a space for it to sing to you. And the only way you would commit to that is by loving it. And the only way you would hear it is by having your heart open to it. So you cannot know what the telos of things are unless you love them. And if you don't let things sing to you, then all you will have is a world of definitions that look nice in a dictionary, but the human is not meant to live a dictionary. You're meant to live a full life. But that requires giving everything the space so that they can sing to you and you sing back to it. But that's a very different relationship to things.
Stunning way to wrap it all up, hey? That's a very brief thing I just want to put on the end there too. It's like that too, I can take that and apply that to the therapeutic context, especially the work I do. You know, like the telos of an emotion is to let it's a loving act for us to allow ourselves to see the impulse in its entirety. It's a loving
yes.
and that then actually gives us more choice about how we integrate that into ourselves as a broader thing, and what we do with that in the relational fields. That is the singing. We just have to see what it sings, and be courageous to look at it and take it into account with the others, and then through the love. And well, this has been this has been a loving adventure, and it's also been a festival for me. So
same for me. I'm
great. I just want to bookmark one thing. I could easily imagine continuing the conversation, and what I feel like has come up here at the end, and I think there's another whole thing, would be something like, how do I help elicit authentic resonance from the other? And I think that does to, the work that, I think all of us have been involved in different ways. I'm thinking of Daniel hosting the net, or the work I do, or Aspasia does with clients. There's something about the ability to have a experience in my body of authentic resonance that I think is very much related to allowing or facilitating you to also have that experience. It goes to this field that, anyway, that was my last 2 cents. So I also love this. Pleasure to be with you both.
That's a beautiful question. I would love to do.
Absolutely.
To follow up on that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I sign off to also to Daniel on doing that with the net, because it just more and more so. What an incredible place. And you are like a beacon, Daniel, in some roundabout ways of bringing. I really see that, of bringing the people together, and who are in that maybe authentic resonance stance and wanting to engage in this way on these topics. And I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I've had a tremendous time. I think there is something of the body that longs to sing and to make music. And the more and more we can attune ourselves to it and position to the mind to allow that singing and to make communities of it, I think that's the telos. That's the love. So I think that's wonderful. I think that's a wonderful topic to discuss, Seth. So this has been magnificent. Thank you for it, Aspasia.
Thank you both. Thank you both for being part of my festival. couldn't imagine it without the two of you here today. Thank you.
Well, it's been a joy. Seth, you're awesome. Aspasia, you're awesome. I've really enjoyed it. And maybe we'll do Christmas carols. So that would be singing, right? So we're all set.
That's pushing me too far.
I
Now.
feel
We'll drink
anxious.
eggnog.
Pushing.
I only do Christmas carols